welcome to the video. This is going to be a very different and unique setup situation. I'm currently at the park just getting some self-care, getting some fresh air, getting some workouts and steps in, and I wanted to do this video because I have a video on my channel about some of the pros of being a social worker, being a medical social worker, working in a hospital. And I also wanted to just share with you some of the challenges and difficulties that I've faced and that some of my coworkers have expressed and shared with me, just to give you guys a good grasp and understanding of some of the challenges that you might face if you're going to be working in a hospital setting. So if you're interested in watching this video, please make sure that you keep watching, that you subscribe, and if you enjoy the video or find anything that I say helpful, give me a thumbs up because it'll help my channel. Okay guys, so one of the challenges of working in a hospital or being a medical or hospital social worker or working in a clinic setting is the politics of the actual hospital and clinic. Some of it can be challenging to work with just because obviously you want to do what's right for your patient, and I work at a Christian hospital, for instance, and there's some barriers and some obstacles and challenges that me and my team have to face if a patient chooses to proceed with their contraception in a sense. So my hospital, you have to have all of this paperwork completed if you want to have a tubal, and if you have a C-section, then a lot of doctors choose to do it at the same time. And so if you don't have that paperwork done or at the right time, then you sometimes don't get a tubal, or sometimes, most of the time, birth control is not covered, and even as a worker, they do not provide or help with payment, or insurance covers it. So a separate company comes in to help assist with that. So that's also something to think about, especially if you're an employee that wants that, or if you work at a prenatal and labor and delivery floor. That's not going to be an option for some people. So one of the challenges is politics. What the hospital says, you kind of have to work around or find alternative methods for the patient to make sure that they get their needs met. So another challenge is actually working with different populations. Well, let me backtrack. A huge challenge, and sometimes it can be a difficulty and frustrating experience working with different professions. So I work at a clinic in the hospital, so obviously there's nurses, there's doctors, there's residents, there's fellows, there's dietitians, there is diabetic educators, there are psychiatrists and pharmacists, and so there's a lot of different aspects and the needs that the patient has that need to be addressed. And as a social worker, sometimes other professions don't include you in those decisions, include you in the patient care. They don't consult you about certain things, and a lot of it has to do with lack of education and knowledge on what a social worker does. So I find myself just being challenged a lot by other professions, not necessarily understanding what a social worker does or what my roles and my job responsibilities and tasks are. So it can be a frustrating experience when they have expectations of me that I'm not even aware of, or another social worker did it just because they didn't want to rub anybody the wrong way or cause any issues. But it doesn't help anybody when you are always a people pleaser, because that sets up failure for other people that you work with. Expect them to do the same things that you do as a person who wants to do above and beyond and do extra and, you know, do things that are completely out of your job responsibilities and range. Maybe a counselor should be doing that, or a psychiatrist should be helping assist with that. And if you take on those job responsibilities, then nursing and everybody else will just be told to call a social worker. So I have had a lot of issues with morals and values and ethics, and as a social worker, you definitely want to advocate for your patient. You want to advocate for their family and the decisions that they make. They have a right to decide and choose what they want for themselves, and so it's imperative to make sure that you stand your ground and assist and also help the patient find out a good balance that makes sure that their medical needs are being taken care of, and yet they're still feeling like they have a choice, that they have a decision to make, that they're being heard, most importantly. Sometimes it's very difficult for doctors, nurses, the medical staff to really understand what it is that the patient, why the patient won't abide or be compliant with what they have to say, or what they suggest that the patient should be doing. And you have to remember that, like, I don't listen to everything my primary care doctor tells me, and they sure don't, you know. So it's not fair to have that expectation on the patient and then to expect me to go bully. They don't tell me to bully her, but it's basically like, can you try to like convince her? I can give her the facts, and if she still chooses not to proceed with that procedure, or she chooses not to go to the appointment that I scheduled for her, then she has a right to decide that for herself, just like everybody else has a right to decide that for themselves. And sometimes I think that physicians and nurse practitioners and doctors and nurses, they get a blurred line because they sometimes have to make decisions without the patient's consent. Like if it's an emergency, then, you know, just have to go ahead and do the procedure or make a decision. And they obviously have seen things that we as social workers haven't seen, and also that the patient hasn't seen. So it's sometimes coming from a good place, but you can't bully a person into doing something, and you can't bully me into bullying somebody or convincing someone to do something after they've already made a decision that this is not something that's going to be beneficial or helpful for them, or they just simply choose not to do it just because they just choose not to do it. So sometimes it can be hard when you're trying to express that to your physician or your doctor or your coworkers, when, you know, patients have rights, and as a social worker, I'm going to stand by my patient's rights. And obviously there's certain situations where the patient doesn't have a choice, like if they're going to harm someone or themselves, then those decisions have to be made by the people around them, by the physicians and social workers as mandated reporters and things like that. So for me specifically, I work a lot of my time, 90% of my time in my work is dedicated to working with pregnant moms who have substance use disorder. And so with that comes along a lot of stigmas, a lot of biases about moms who use substances while they are pregnant. And obviously our babies come out addicted to certain substances, and a lot of nurses, a lot of doctors have a bias and a negative opinion or thoughts. And sometimes those thoughts actually come out into words and to actions. And so it's very challenging to work with a population who's already dealing with a lot of stigma and discrimination and challenges, and then you have the people that are supposed to be caring for you also displaying that or making you feel uncomfortable or making you feel less than. You have to be there to help advocate for them and make sure that they are being heard and getting fair and adequate care and treatment, and that the people who are actually serving them are there to serve them and do their job, because you're not there to have an opinion about someone's lifestyle. You're there to treat them for medical care. And I have this problem every single day, dealing with people. And the thing is that my hospital is really trained, and they specialize in dealing with what we call NAS babies who are addicted to substances. And so we're very familiar, we're very aware, it's very common for us to have these babies and these moms, and yet we're still faced with these discrimination, these comments, these remarks. And so it can be very challenging and also very defeating as a coworker, as a person who works in a hospital, when people that should know better should be doing better, and they don't. And you constantly have to have these conversations, or have to bring it up in meetings, and just make sure that people are actually doing their job without a bias. And any like discrimination is very hard, because everyone has a certain bias and discrimination and opinion about things, and it can come from previous experience. It could just be coming from your own, thoughts, or what you've seen, or what, you've heard, or whatever. But as a physician, as a nurse, as a person on a medical team taking care of a family, you just need to take care of a family. All right, guys. So another challenge that I've found is that I came from a person who did a lot of like case management, or long-term interactions and encounters with patients, working in school settings. So I watched some of these kids go from 2 years old all the way to 5. And so it wasn't challenging in a sense, but if you're a person who likes to establish relationships and maintain relationships with your patients for an extended period of time, it might be hard at first to initially adjust to that, just because a lot of the interactions in the hospital will be emergent, will be immediate, and it will be kind of final. You don't really do a lot of follow-up unless the patient does come back into the hospital to be readmitted. So if this is something that you're looking for, is to have actual like relationships and follow-up and be able to connect and learn more about your patients, you're doing a quick consult/assessment, and then you provide them with the immediate needs that they have with resources and assistance, and you send them on their way. So they're going to be discharged not too soon after you meet them. So it's something to think about if that is something that you want. So another challenge and difficulty that I've found while working in the hospital is that, I mentioned it before, a little bit before the previous clip, is that a lot of people aren't aware of what a social worker does. So you do miss out on certain people that you might have wanted to see or meet up with in the room. And because there's a lack of knowledge and understanding of what a social worker does, especially in a hospital setting, even though they've been around for several years, there isn't really still an established understanding, just because social workers can work in many different fields. So they can do emergency room, they can do labor and delivery, they can do internal medicine, they can do pediatrics, they could do NICU. And so it's amazing being a social worker because you have so many different options, so many different choices to choose from, but also it just doesn't create a good understanding for our colleagues and managers, which is another issue, is that a lot of the time you won't have a LCSW who is actually your manager. So for the 2 years that I've worked at my hospital, we've had someone who got their master's in business, and then another who was a nurse who turned into a manager. So it can be hard to explain or share your frustrations with someone who doesn't really truly understand what you do, what your values are, and how that differs from the medical team, which I think most of the time takes a lot of priority. They get a lot of recognition, which is totally fine because they totally deserve it. Like, nurses work hard and they deserve the recognition. If you're a person who doesn't really do well on your feet, you might find it challenging to work in a hospital setting, just because you might be called into 3 different places. You need to be in 3 different rooms or seeing 3 different patients kind of around the same time. And doctors, residents, nurses expect a follow-up from you or a report about what the issue is, how you assisted them, and what it looks like moving forward, and how the medical team can proceed with discharge or different things like that. So you have to be kind of like ready and prepared to walk into many different types of situations. No day is the same day. So every person that wants a little bit more consistency, a little bit more of a routine, then hospital social worker probably isn't the best option for you, just because no day looks the same. You get to rotate different nurses, and depending on what shifts you work or how your hospital rotates the nurses and the doctors and the fellows, if you're a teaching hospital, then things constantly change. You're gonna have to kind of explain who you are to different people and what you do. So might be a challenge for you if you're a person who likes to just like go in the office, do what you do, make your calls, and go home. Okay guys, so I'm kind of back where I started, did a whole lap, but there aren't really a lot of challenges working as a hospital social worker. It can be fun and exciting job. I personally don't work weekends, which is really nice. I don't work major holidays, which is also in my pros video, and a lot of the social workers I know also don't. They hire PRN social workers to work weekends, and yeah, I mean, if that's something that you want, I'm sure that you can find or try to negotiate that, because I'm sure that they would like for you to work weekends, but it's not, you know, required of me. I get the privilege of working in 2 different type of clinic settings in the hospital on labor and delivery, which gives me access to the NICU, perinatal floor, and everything. So I kind of have a unique and very diverse experience, and I just found that a lot of the issues come from people not really understanding what a social worker does, even after you've kind of explained them that, you know, that's not my job or my responsibility to do that. And also, like, they kind of expect that you're this fairy wand and you have access to services and you have back, you know, passes to get patients access or easier access. And it's not fair to expect that of me. And a lot of places require that the patient does complete the intake or that they make the call themselves. And so that's an expectation that a lot of doctors and nurses have, that, oh, like, social work will handle it and get it all taken care of. And it's not always that easy. And so dealing with a lot of biases from the medical field, and not necessarily having the true fairness that the patient deserves, and having to advocate for that, and not always feeling heard as a social worker. So I have a good relationship with my doctor, and some of the concerns that I have, she definitely presents to the whole general team on labor and delivery, like all of the managers. And so it's good to have people that can also advocate for you and your patients. So find someone who is or has power and authority, leverage, privilege to present things and not feel like your job's threatened and things like that. You know, obviously hospital politics and some of the restrictions and the requirements can be difficult on you, on your patient, on patient care. And yeah, but I think a lot of it just comes from confusion and biases. That's what I find the most frustrating. But I really hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that you can hear me throughout all the wind, but you got a nice little walk-in with me. If you want me to elaborate or provide clarity or stories on something, then I would love to do that for you guys. Just break it down. If you have any specific questions, you can leave them down in the comment box, and I will always respond back to you guys. Make sure that you like the video so that I can keep doing these social work videos and update you guys.